Yesterday, we talked a bunch about data visualizations matter. They matter for news dissemination, education, scientific discovery, social justice. And the reason why they do that is because we have very easy access to visual information through them. So here's an example showing the debt in percent of GDP comparing Portugal with the Eurozone average. Now we can very easily see how Portugal's debt changed over time. We can have an intuitive comparison to the Eurozone average. It enables mental visual projections on how the trends might continue beyond the existing data. And we even have labeled data points, so we can actually extract what is the exact maximum value. And that's just from one visualization, and this is really easy and straightforward. I assume just by me reading that line, you could immediately look at the plot and you could sort of see what I was talking about, right? Like that's the great thing about data visualizations and why I think we're all excited about them. Now, we also talked about how therefore inaccessibility to those data visualizations really matters when people have low visual literacy. Now, what I'm going to talk in this talk about, this is not a valid English sentence, but you get what I'm saying, right? We're going to go through this together. I didn't have much sleep. So in this talk, I want to talk about inaccessibility when you don't have visual access to data visualizations in the first place. This could be, I'm going to focus on blind and low vision folks who don't have access to those visualizations, but this could be any of us. Any of us will probably have some sort of visual impairment at some point in their life, or we have circumstantial visual impairment. For instance, if we just want to listen to a paper while we're on a walk, right? You don't have visual access to the figures, and you might actually want to inquire about things that are visually displayed. So descriptions actually remain the main accessibility tool throughout, but especially also for data visualizations. There are other tools, but they remain lower because they need hardware support. They're not always available. They might need training in order to access them. So even though descriptions have downsides, they remain the main accessibility tool when we cannot visually see data visualizations. So I'm going to focus on descriptions. All right, so what does accessibility really mean? Well, let's just say I had tweeted or X'd, posted. I had posted. I'm so excited for the talk today, right? Now, a screen reader, for instance, could now just read that out. It could read out, I'm so excited for the talk today. But the problem is that the accessibility challenge we're talking about is actually a multimodal translation problem. Now, what do I mean by that? Well, instead of writing a tweet that can be read out, I could post an image. You might have seen Peggy yesterday. That's her. So I might post a picture of her on Twitter or X or whatever. Now, for the screen reader, this is just a bunch of pixels. So what it now needs to read out is some sort of linguistic description of what these pixels actually try to communicate to us. And that is the challenge of the multimodal translation problem, translating between visual information and textual information. So for instance, I could write an alt description or an accessibility description, whatever you may call it. Cute small dog sitting on a sidewalk, looking up with big eyes, ears are propped up. And then the screen reader can read that out. However, these descriptions are incredibly rare. That is true across the web. That is even more true when we're in offline media. So specifically on X or Twitter, less than 0.1% of all images on English language Twitter or X have alt text. I replicated this in 2023 and again in 2024. This is not something that is changing. It might actually be going down. On Wikipedia, I estimated on English language Wikipedia that about 6% of images have alt text. And that is the very, very upper bound of that. We're not talking about useful descriptions. We're talking about something being there that a screen reader can read out. And sometimes this is just two words like a house, or I tried to filter that out as best as I could, is just 200 pixels by 300 pixels, because people don't know what accessibility descriptions really are. But the upper bound, the really upper bound is 6% on Wikipedia. And we don't really have separate data on data visualization accessibility at scale online. My best guess is that it actually just is distributed with all other visual media, for instance, on Wikipedia, so at about below 6%. Another reason why accessibility is really hard to solve is that we really don't know yet what makes a good description of an image. And that's really, really hard to measure. One thing that the accessibility community has converged on is there is no one-size-fits-all description for any image. So let me give you an example of that. We will start with a general image, which is the main domain I work on. I'm talking here because I love to get more involved with data visualizations, and I want to get all of your guys' input. So let's take this example. A man in a suit gestures while speaking with the US flag in the background. This is what GPT-4V generated as the description for this image. You know, it's reasonable, right? It seems, no. Okay, good. Keep thinking that. All right, so what is another description that we can give for this image? Barack Obama giving his last State of the Union address. This is also something that can be correctly said about this particular image. What else can we say? A hand with an index finger that points up, seemingly attached to a person who has their mouth open, teeth are visible. Also, a correct description for this image. Let's do another one because it's fun. A microphone facing away from the viewer, a flag is in the background, a man stands between the microphone and the flag. All right? Now, we can do this in the same way. This is me being creative last night for the data visualization. Okay, so the original Wikipedia alt text for this particular visualization was Portuguese debt compared to Eurozone average. GPT-4o, as of last night, generated Portugal's debt rose sharply after 2008, peaking at 131% of GDP in 2014. It's actually 2015, but upon seeing that, I realized I wrote it wrong in my paper too, and identified it as 2014. But it is actually 2015, while the Eurozone average remained lower and more stable, under 100% throughout. So except for the 2014-15 mix-up, that's also correct. Now let's do another fun one. All years between 1999 and 2019 listed in order. Above it are two rising lines in summergrass green and Lux hibiscus red. The data point labels have shade. Also correct. Okay, so what I want to exemplify is for each individual image, be it a general image, be it a data visualization, there are many, I would argue infinitely many descriptions that can go with that visualization. And situational context, be it the website domain, the topic, and the social context, is it the viewer identity, or even who is writing the description in the first place, determines which informational details actually become relevant and need to be mentioned. And I will elaborate on that throughout the talk. Now, I want to go do a quick excursion to why this is an opportunity for AI, because this is actually my main field of study. I work in natural language processing and how that relates to accessibility and communication. So the problem of non-visual accessibility can actually not be solved by human labor alone, and there are many reasons for that. There's too much existing visual data already out there that goes beyond what manual labor efforts can afford. Quality descriptions require especially trained personnel, which further exacerbates the feasibility of actually making all of that accessible, which is something I'm going to keep talking about. Another thing I'm going to keep talking about is visual descriptions that are ideal are non-static. So they depend on situational and social context, and they need to change based on locations, on time, on viewer, etc. And what makes descriptions useful, also for data visualizations, is a matter of ongoing research. There are new guidelines that constantly emerge and that actually require revisions all the time of those descriptions to actually ideally meet accessibility needs. And gold accessibility standards are interactive and on demand. And vision language models are currently our most promising opportunity for actually significantly advancing equal access in a way that we haven't been able to do before. So that's the promise. Now, blind and low vision users, you will often see the abbreviation BLV users, already use AI as a really important tool. So they actually choose AI tools over human descriptions in specific contexts. Like, for instance, because it grants them independence, or in privacy-sensitive contexts where the visual data is, for instance, bank statements or things like that, they would rather send that out to an AI model than send it out to a person that they have to engage with while they read their private information. And BLV users also provide that report that AI tools provide richer descriptions in a more systematic way. So they actually report, I've actually just grown used to the Be My AI descriptions, which is an app that uses ChatGPT in the backend, because some people just don't know how to describe things to blind people. They have no idea what blind people can and cannot see and what they want to know and don't want to know. So there is a promise in AI models. However, they have multiple challenges, and I'm going to summarize them in one, but there are way more, which we can talk about after. But models are built to solve tasks that we can't yet fully define and evaluate. And this is actually where we're in a unique point in history where that's the case. In the past, in AI model development, we have always developed evaluation tools alongside the models that we've developed. And they have sort of been in a, tandem relationship of one-upping each other. Now, with the boost in what we've seen in AI model capabilities, suddenly we are in the position where evaluation tools cannot capture anymore what our models can already generate. They generate paragraphs of texts, but we don't have evaluation tools that can evaluate whether that is good text, right? So this is a really big puzzle for the community. And it leads to a misalignment with accessibility needs, which I've shown in multiple of my works. We're going to talk about these examples in detail, but the lesson that we can take away from that is that careful task definition and a robust evaluation pipeline development is important when we are developing such systems. All right. So intermediate summary. All accessibility solutions, be it AI accessibility solutions or non-AI solutions, actually require us first to understand what makes descriptions actually good descriptions for data visualizations. And that is research we don't have yet. And this is the basis also for effective human writing of descriptions, as well as AI model design, training, and evaluation. We need it everywhere. Now, to date, what we have a bunch of guidelines, and we have template-based approaches generally to description writing. Like, this is what it should look like. However, there are a couple of problems. Like, first of all, guidelines are very long, and they're still incomplete, right? They're a great starting point, but usually if you just want to write something for something you quickly want to make accessible, you're not going to go through the whole document. And prior research actually shows that people, even if they have access to the guideline, don't follow the guidelines. Now, our approach is, let's try to treat accessibility primarily as a communication problem and see how far we get when we do that. So what does it mean to treat accessibility as a communication problem? This is going to be the first question I'm going to try to answer in the rest of this talk. And then how far does intuitive understanding actually get us? And how can we set ourselves up for maximizing good description when we're recruiting description writers? And I'm going to talk about that generally and then specifically about data visualizations. Now let's go back to our original example, where we had the original Wikipedia alt text, Portuguese debt compared to Eurozone average. Now, this seems decent, but what I'm going to argue is that context really affects how decent that is, how good that is. So I'm going to show you the actual context where this data visualization comes from. So this is the Wikipedia article. It was on the Euro area crisis. It has the subsection, it is in the subsection of Portugal, unlike other European countries that were also severely hit by the Great Recession in the late 2000s, etc., etc. This is where it's embedded. All right, clear so far, the context? Great. Now, what you might notice is below this image is something that said, debt of Portugal compared to Eurozone average since 1999. This is what we commonly call a caption, right? This is the image caption. You usually see that when you read a New York Times article, any sort of news, when you write a paper, right? You write a figure caption. Now that caption is intended to complement the visual. It contextualizes what you're seeing in the visual for you to better understand what is in the visual. Now, this other thing is what I would call a description, following journalism, library science, language. That would be called a description. This replaces visual information. This is supposed to take the place of where the data visualization is. It's not replacing the caption, it's replacing the visual, right? Now, given this context, this is bad. This information I already got from the context. This is already in the caption. That's not a good description. That doesn't give me, why do we have that visualization? If we only get the information that's in the caption, then why did we need a visualization in the first place, right? So in previous work, I've heavily argued that descriptions and captions have distinct communicative goals. And if we want to consider real accessibility progress, then we need to take into account how context interacts with what we need for our visual accessibility. Now, coming back to the one image, many description point that I said previously, we've actually found in a couple of prior works how important that is. For instance, we put the same image in different Wikipedia articles, and we found that the descriptions that people write and the descriptions that BLV as well as cited users prefer really depends on how you change the specific context around the image. Now, for visualization, again, coming back to our running example, we can have another thought experiment like that. Like, how would you describe this visualization for a student who is learning about the trade-off between minimalism and ease of data extraction, right? Like a meta point. The advantages of y-axis label tilting, or designing for red-green blind viewers. And you can keep going. In all of these situations, you will explain it differently. Other scenario, you're describing this visualization for a blind journalist writing an article about Portuguese economy. Again, you're describing that visualization completely differently, right? We've also, quick plug, done some work on interactivity, which, we've talked about data visualizations are important to interact with in order for us to understand data. This is similarly true for accessibility. But even for a static visualization, interactivity is the thing that we really need. People will ask different questions based on the context they're in. They want to know different things based on what they already know, etc. So that is a really important facet of accessibility. Now, the premise of my work is people know how to communicate and integrate context flexibly and intuitively. We have shown that in our work. But so the question arises, how do people actually write accessibility descriptions for data visualizations when they don't have guidelines, but they simply aim to communicate well? How far can we get there? And then how does visualization literacy, coming back to a main theme here, of the description writers actually play into their ability to effectively communicate about data visualizations? We talked about literacy of the designers of the data visualizations, of the consumers. But what about people who write descriptions for them to make them accessible? What about their literacy? What does it matter there? So this is very recent work, so I'm happy to hear feedback. So this is data we collected from English Wikipedia with a priority for alt text description coverage. So we primarily extracted data visualizations from Wikipedia that already had alt text. And the general pipeline looked like this. We took the data visualization. Context is omitted here for ease of viewing. Then we recruited crowd workers that had high, low, medium, all ranges of visual literacy, and we asked them to describe those data visualizations. Then we recruited blind and low vision users and asked them to evaluate those descriptions for us. I'm going to go into the details now. We can look through the examples more. So the first thing we did when we elicited the descriptions from fully cited participants, we gave them instructions that motivated the communicative purpose. So data visualizations are generally presented within their original contexts, emphasizing how they are part of the general discourse. And instructions looked something like that. Consider you're reading a Wikipedia article that includes a data visualization as below. This image, however, cannot be seen by readers who are blind or have low vision. They need to rely on textual descriptions that can be read to them by screen readers. And then it explained the layout of the study, where you could see the page title of the Wikipedia article, the section title, as well as the caption. We then elicited descriptions from the fully cited participants. Those were the main trials. They looked somewhat like this. So they saw the Wikipedia article, the subsection. They saw the data visualization, the caption that was associated with it. Then they were asked to write a description, and then how difficult it was to describe this image. After this phase, they actually had an editing phase. So this is a design that we have established in prior work that we've done, which has proven to be very effective, where you then take this description, replace the image with it, basically put the person in the position of not being able to see the visualization anymore and only read their own description. Then you give them an opportunity again to edit that description. And that's actually taken up quite frequently by our crowd workers. And after writing 5 descriptions, they all completed the mini VLAD test, which we already talked a little bit about yesterday, so a visualization literacy test. And the final data set we have has 631 individual descriptions for 56 different images, and 28 of which also have the alt text written by Wikipedia editors available. So this is just a small insight into the inaccessibility. You might have an idea of how many descriptions there are, data visualizations there are on Wikipedia. I think English language Wikipedia has about 11,000. We had 28, which had some alt text available that we could use, right? Speaking again, the inaccessibility online. Then we wanted to evaluate those descriptions. We conducted BLV participant interviews. We recruited 10 participants. We did semi-structured interviews where we did a mix of ranking, rating, and open-ended questions. And we supplemented this with an automatic context extraction analysis to understand what do these descriptions look like and what can we potentially learn from them. Now, what we find is, first of all, when we take data visualizations that come from the web broadly, they range in difficulty. This is in contrast to much prior work that has been done, where there was usually one resource selected, like the Pew Research Center graphs, that usually all look the same, are pretty easily understandable. Here we have data visualizations of physics, Wikipedia pages, and whatever that require a whole different kind of expertise. And we see that sort of reflected in our difficulty graphs. Without guidelines, descriptions are on average 215 characters long, which is much more than the 150 character limit, which is often associated with alt text descriptions that you're supposed to give. And it's about 2 times longer than what the alt text descriptions were that were originally present on Wikipedia. Generally, our crowd workers had pretty decent insight into their own visualization literacy when you correlate it with the mini VLAD scores. With the mini VLAD, we actually see ceiling effects where a lot of crowd workers actually reached full best performance, whereas in their own assessment of their capabilities, that was not the case. It made me a bit wonder whether a lot of crowd workers have already done mini VLAD tests and they've figured out the solutions. So that's maybe something to be wary of. Now, what about the relationship between visual literacy and BLV user preferences? So we find that blind and low vision users actually almost categorically prefer descriptions written by crowd workers with moderate to high visualization literacy and not low visualization literacy. So I think this becomes clearest in this ranking graph. So we asked them to rank, they got one image and then a description written by someone with high visualization literacy, medium, and low. And then they were supposed to rank the quality. And basically, the one with the lowest visualization literacy was almost always ranked as the worst description that was given out of the 3 alternatives. And we also see that when we ask them just to give a numeric rating that is independent of the other descriptions. And when we try to dive deeper into why that might be, we actually see that when you have low or high visualization literacy as a description writer, you seem to write descriptions that promote actual understanding of the data visualization. And it's not because the description was easy to follow. All of those descriptions are easy to follow. They're all written decently, but only these ones actually promote understanding of the visualization. In the interest of time, generally, I just want to quickly say that we find that crowd workers with higher visualization literacy scores also write longer descriptions, and we find that longer descriptions on average are preferred by the blind and low vision users, which might be another thing that contributes to this effect. Based on prior work, also by Arvind and his group, we also did some automatic analysis of the type of content that was present in those descriptions. And we find that participants with lower visualization literacy focus on level 1 information. And level 1 information are easily observable content of a visualization, like the x-axis, the y-axis, and so on. Participants with higher visualization literacy specify more level 2 and level 3 information. Those are identifying statistical concepts and relations that actually require inference. And we know from that work, and we replicate that in our work too, that BLV users actually prefer level 2 and level 3 information over level 1 information in data visualization descriptions. And that really suggests that description writers with higher visualization literacy better serve BLV users' semantic content needs intuitively. Summary. First of all, I want to make the argument that non-visual accessibility is non-negotiable at this time anymore. We should all be thinking about that. It doesn't only serve like a low incidence population, it actually serves everyone. We should talk about that. Vision language models, we heard that yesterday from Arnav's work, from so many people, they remain unreliable, and especially for data visualization accessibility. So we require a deeper understanding of what makes data visualization descriptions useful, and we need to work on scalable crowdsourcing efforts. We have learned that blind and low vision users prefer trend summaries and statistical reasoning, and if we pay attention to the visualization literacy scores of the people who write those descriptions, then we already get something that's closer to what is actually needed than if we ignore their visualization literacy. And understanding how we can raise the baseline standard for descriptions allows for specific training and specific guidelines on the things that we're actually not good at. And the hope is that that might actually help with the adoption of those guidelines and how people can improve their description writing if we can give more focused feedback on what is really needed. That's my lab. Thank you all for listening. Looking forward to your questions if we have time.
Thank you, Elisa, for that fascinating, galvanizing talk. We do have time for a quick question. Anybody? Yes.
Yeah, amazing talk.
Thank you.
This is super interesting work. I was wondering if you asked the participants who wrote the description if they had the objectives of the viewers in mind. So, for example, I could imagine me when I'm writing the description, I might be like, if a viewer wants to see certain trends, I might emphasize certain trends, then put all the different trends that are inside the visualization. So I was wondering if that's a consideration you had when designing the study.
Yes, that's a very good question. Now, what you can use context for is getting a really good estimate of what questions a user or a reader might most likely have about that data visualization. And you can use that as a proxy to what to focus on, right? So there are linguists in the room. If we're talking about the question under discussion that is being raised by the context, that is the thing that you need to address with the description. There might be, and there will be, individual differences, but there are limits to how far we can go. So I think as a first step, this is the best we can do, and then we should not be satisfied and keep going further.